Welcome in Parlons Design for an exceptional episode with Joël Miller, designer at Figma. This episode will be in English, already sorry for my accent, but Parlons Design will go back to French for future episodes. I did love this discussion, hope you will too. Enjoy the episode. La saison 6 de Parlons Design est sponsorisée par la KakatoS Academy, la nouvelle façon de se former au design. Hello Joel, nice to meet you. Welcome in Parlons Design.
Thank you, thanks for having me. Good to see you as well.
Yeah, it's the first episode of Parlons Design in English, but I am really happy to meet you. Can you introduce yourself? Who are you? What was your journey to product design?
So my name is Joël Miller. I'm a product designer at Figma, and I've been at Figma for about a year and a half or just over that. I'm based in London and have been for the past 6 years. And I actually didn't start in product design. I worked as a graphic designer initially, and I studied graphic design at university for 3 years in Leeds, which is like a small city in the north of the UK. So yeah, I studied doing branding, graphic design, and then graduated from there and immediately wanted to actually work in Manchester, which is like another city in the UK, and work in a design agency there. I had this like dream of being like a graphic designer in this nice design agency, working with these cool companies and doing branding and things like that. And then when I graduated, I found that I tried to apply to all these different companies and I just didn't get any good responses from anyone. I think everyone who starts out in design has probably been there and knows how it feels. But yeah, a lot of rejection at the start. So I kind of reeled in my dreams and expectations. And I took like an internship at a really, really small agency in Preston, which is the city in the north of England where I'm from. And I had to work for free for a month, and I was just working on internal like company stuff. But after a while, I started to work on some real like client projects, and eventually I got my first like job in design as a graphic designer in a small agency. So it wasn't in Manchester where I wanted to be, but it was something. It was a job, so I was really happy. So yeah, I worked there for about 1 year, and then I kind of got the itch to move to a bigger city. Luckily, one of my friends from university as well, he was in like a similar position. He was working in a small town at home, and we both decided to move to London to sort of like go for better opportunities. And also most of our friends were there as well. So we were getting a bit lonely in the north. We wanted to move a bit further south. So yeah, I took a job at a design agency called MASH. That was also like doing graphic design, web design, branding for small companies and things like that. Really had a good time there. Worked there for about a year and a half, and I learned probably way more than I would ever learn in university there, to be honest. It was a really good experience. And I got a lot of like creative freedom and a lot of responsibility on the digital side of things. So I think this is really where I sort of started to get into like more UI design rather than just like traditional graphic design. So a year and a half after working there, I wanted to move into tech because I felt like the opportunities it's a bit more better paid. Also, I wanted to try working for just one brand instead of working for several different brands at the same time, because it always felt like you couldn't really finish a project because of time constraints or because of money or something like that. So I moved to tech and I took a job at a company called Paddle, which is very similar to Stripe, but it's very specifically, they're sort of like focused on doing payment infrastructure for software companies specifically and SaaS companies. So Stripe's kind of like for everyone. Paddle's like very specific. So I worked there as a brand designer. I was the only one for about a year, and I sort of like got to own the brand side of that company, doing all the website and things like that. And it was mainly focused on the website, really. So digital design and UI design. But I also got exposure to working with the product managers and the product designers in the company too. And I think this is where I really sort of like opened up my eyes to product and got a real interest and intrigue into wanting to learn more about that. So I remember I was always sort of like hanging out with the product managers or product designers, asking them loads of questions about design on products, about the company, the strategy and things like that. I was asking them what they were reading and what podcasts they were listening to and things like that. And I started to like kind of educate myself on this whilst I was working as a graphic designer or brand designer, I guess, in Paddle. And then eventually I wanted to transition over to product design because I felt like I'd done all I could do in branding and it wasn't really exciting me or challenging me anymore. And I wanted to take this new challenge of doing product design instead. So I thought about staying in Paddle, and then I thought it's probably better to go to a different company and try and throw myself into a different environment. And so I applied for a couple of jobs and I ended up getting 2 offers. One was from a sort of like a bank kind of company, but they were looking for more of a lead UI designer rather than like a product designer. So in that team, I would have worked with UX designers and I would have just focused on UI design mainly. And then also I got another offer from a company called Visly. And Visly was a very, very, very small startup. They were focusing on designer and developer collaboration. And I felt like that sounded way more interesting to me. First of all, like the challenge of being in a really small team and a completely brand new product that in a sort of like space that really interests me, felt more interesting than working for like a bank tech company or fintech company, I guess. So I took the job at Visly and I sort of like learned as I went along. I spent a lot of time working really closely with the founders and the engineers, and I did so many like quick iterations of the product at an early stage, and they were sort of like building this design tool for developers. So I got I guess that was like a quick experience of what it would be like to work at Figma, because obviously that's working on a design tool as well. So I was working on this design tool for developers, and I remember spending lots of time sort of unpicking different products like Framer and Figma and really trying to understand how those work and the like canvas interactions and things like that, and how they like structure the panels and the side and the controls and all this kind of stuff. So I really enjoyed working at Visly, and yeah, I did that for about a year and a half. We built out like a pretty good product, I think, and then it actually got a lot of attention from Figma, and we ended up being acquired by Figma. And so myself and the whole team at Visly, we all moved over to Figma, and yeah, we've been there ever since. So it's kind of been a bit of a roller coaster journey, going through like graphic design to branding design in a tech company, and then moving to product for a small startup, and now I'm at Figma. But yeah, not the most traditional route, but it was definitely been a fun journey.
Yeah, really looks like an amazing journey. Behind the school, it has really been your experiences that help you to grow and to develop new skills. So it's great. When you were acquired by Figma, how did you live this period? Because it should have been a lot of change in your habits of work, in your teammates, in the size of the company. How did you live that?
Yeah, it was definitely shocking at first, going from an 8-person company. At the time in Figma was about 400 or 350-ish people. So that was quite a transition. It was the biggest company I've ever worked for. So the small agencies I worked for were about 8 people or 10 people, even 3 people. And Paddle was about just under 200 people. So yeah, it was definitely a transition. And also just starting at Figma, there's just so much like historical context that you need to catch up with, and like understanding how the editor works, understanding how the different teams work with each other, understanding just working with other designers as well, because that's something I hadn't really had a lot of experience with. I worked with another designer at Visly, and it was just sort of the 2 of us. And now moving to Figma, there were about 15 designers at the time. So figuring out how to best collaborate with all those designers as well. Actually having a design manager as well. I've never had a design manager before who's actually got a design background. So that was also like a learning curve, like understanding how to work with them and get the best out of their knowledge too. It was kind of, the first couple of weeks were tough because it was just such a big change, but we worked really closely together on this. I think we were also the first team, first product team for Figma to have in Europe too. So there was a lot of work that we had to do to sort of make sure that the time zone difference was working well, make sure that meetings weren't going on too late. And initially they were a little bit too late, but we sort of like really worked collaboratively together to figure out what's the best crossover time, what are the best like core hours that we should keep free on both sides, and use that as like collaboration time, because there's an 8-hour difference between London and San Francisco. And my other colleague who's a designer, he lives in Sweden, so that's like 9-hour difference, so it's even worse for him. But yeah, I think Figma, at first it was a bit tough because we just didn't know how to work with that long distance thing, but now it's pretty smooth and it's working pretty well.
And when you joined Figma, was it already a distributed team with people in many countries, or at the time was there only designer in the US?
Yeah, at the time there was only designers in the US, but there was also a New York office, San Francisco, and also I think there were some remote people as well. I think COVID had a big impact on this. So obviously Figma, the team was working during the lockdown and everything. And I think some people did move out the cities in the US. I think if you look at the news, like historic in the past, a lot of people did move out of San Francisco and out of New York, obviously, because it's probably the worst place to be if you're in a lockdown. So I think at that point, Figma got really used to working in a remote environment, and also just our tool in general. Figma is just a perfect tool to use in a remote environment because it's so collaborative, multiplayer and everything. So I think it really helped. Actually, sort of, the pandemic probably really helped figure out a lot of those things, a lot of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to see distributed teams like that. Often we think as a company which have team in many different countries, that each team will work on a specific product or a specific feature. Here at Figma, you're working. Every one of you are working on the same product. You really work on Figma, mainly on the new AutoLayout. What are the advantages of this way of work today?
Yeah, I think if I take it in the context of AutoLayout, which is a project I worked on with Oscar, who's in Sweden, and also with engineers who are in all over the US, actually, the East Coast and the West Coast. That was really interesting and it was actually quite a good project, I guess, for remote working, because we got to design sort of like in our time zone and like really spend a lot of time collaborating on the design, exploring different things. And then just as we'd like start to finish the day, the engineers would be up, and then we got to like present them their design work, and we have a little discussion, catch up about it for about half an hour to an hour. And then we'd finish our day, and then the engineers would go off and like build all that stuff. And then we'd wake up and they'd have like some questions written out in Slack that we could catch up on. And so we'd like sort of like do that again, do that process, and then hand over some more things, and then they'd go to sleep again. They'd be working on something overnight. And there were so many times when there was some like design edge cases that we hadn't thought of, and the engineers had just like come up with some solution and then prototyped it and then sent it over a video. And then in the morning we got to like look at that and think about it and talk through it. And actually it was a really nice way of working, because even though there is this separation between design and engineering, it was actually just a continuous fluid way of working, because there would just be so much progress. And we found that during the AutoLayout project that it just worked super smoothly. We were kind of like unsure how it would go in the beginning, but it was actually one of the most smoothest projects I've ever worked on. We just had total understanding of way of working, and it was super collaborative, but also just you had so much focus time too. It was really great.
As a designer, it should look like each of your dream happens when you sleep, and at the wake up, you can see what it looks like in reality, and how you can improve it, or you can fix the things you didn't think about. Magic.
I think one of the good things about Figma is that a lot of the engineers have a good design sort of skill set as well. So they'll just come up with some designs or suggestions, like the icon in absolute positioning. When you enable that setting, and then the icon has this like sort of different state where it has these like brackets around it. One of the engineers came up with that, like this design for how to represent that. And we woke up and like, this is a really good idea. Let's just do this. So it's like, it was really nice to see how the engineers like coming into the design world a bit as well. And I think it's all because of Figma, I think, really, that where they feel like they have the freedom to do that.
Yeah. Great. And about still about the distributed team, what is the worst part of working in a distributed team?
I think it's mainly the tools that we have that are the worst part. They're not really made for working in a distributed team. So I think the worst part is probably Slack, to be quite honest. I actually quite like being distributed. I don't think there's some like disadvantages, like you don't get to see people in person, but we do get to do a lot of offsites and go traveling quite a bit, which is also quite nice. Like I like to go traveling quite a lot, so being able to go to San Francisco or New York or even in Berlin recently or Sweden, just being able to do that once a quarter is really nice. So I guess that disadvantage actually turns into an advantage for me. But the worst part is probably the tools. I think Slack is a big problem. When I start to finish my day, everyone comes online on Slack. There's a lot of conversations happening, and it kind of feels like when you're waking up in the morning that you've been on holiday every day. When you're catching up on all the missed messages, that's what it feels like every day. And we're only getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so it's getting noisier and noisier and noisier. And I really think we need a better communication tool that for distributed teams, so that it doesn't feel like you're always catching up. But I guess in a sense, the US is going to have this problem too. As like Europe gets bigger too, they're going to have to be catching up more. And yeah, I just don't think there's a thing that exists yet that can sort that problem. But that's definitely the worst part. Also, like trying to stay off your phone and like having Slack on my phone is a really bad idea. I should really probably delete it, but trying to like stay off it and actually just switch off from work can be a bit hard.
Yeah, because at 11 p.m. you can receive a message from someone who is working at its normal schedule, but for you it's at bad hours.
Yeah, exactly. And then you then you start thinking about the problem and you're like, oh, I've got this idea. Wait, maybe I'll just go to my laptop. And like, no, I have to stop. I can deal with this in the morning. And then sometimes you even forget because you've seen the notification and you just forget about it. So yeah, it does. It requires a lot of discipline from yourself.
Yeah, we have a lot of great tools for synchronous, real-time discussion, but for this asynchronous way of work, it's way more difficult today to find the right balance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And do you know if Figma is growing really fast? Will you keep this distributed way of working, or will you work in side team in the future? Do you have any information about that? Or will it live with the scaling of the company?
I think we're definitely going to keep the distributed way of working. I think we've just seen that I think we have to in order to scale globally, which we want to do. We know we have an office in Japan now, in Tokyo. We've got offices in Berlin and Paris, obviously London, New York, San Francisco. So and also in the US, there's a lot of people in different cities, like in different states, different like Texas and Florida, and someone's even in Hawaii. So yeah, I think we will keep this way of working. I think we don't see it as a way of getting in the way of our work. I think also employees can choose to be either remote fully, or they can choose to be in one of the hubs. So Figma is definitely going to keep this way of working. As to how the teams will be growing, whether they'll be siloed or not, I don't actually know. I think we'll figure that out as we grow and expand. I think we do have a product team. Like the most of the product team is in the US and in the UK and Sweden. We are another product team, and we're just starting to grow our team now. So we'll see what happens with that, and whether then we'll become like a siloed team. Who knows? It's too early to say at the moment.
Yeah. So cool. Thank you for all this information about this unique way of working. So other companies probably do like that, but it's not really common. We can go back to your design work at Figma. How do you work and things like that? You did work on the new AutoLayout, which is really, really amazing. so many people love it, so I can't say it. Can you share with us the design process you use at Figma on the project you are currently working on? It's already the end of the first part of this discussion. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The second part of this interview is coming next week, and Joël will tell us about the Figma design process, as well as of some great tips to grow as a designer. Thanks for the listening. See you next week on Parlons Design. Salut!